Welcome to the Sumerian Forge. I'm guessing you're here because you're a beginner, don't have much budget, and want to learn how to build a really cool shelf that's really strong. So, let's head over to my messy workshop and get started. Okay, so welcome to my messy ass workshop. For today's build, we're just going to be using a couple of lengths of 25 by 25 square steel tubing with a 1.6 millimeter wall thickness. Sorry, Americans, I work in millimeters, so do the conversion. And some 25 millimeter flat bar, so I can make the flanges that bolt to the wall. Some of the tools I'll be using is just some 90-degree metal clamps, a little square, a steel cut-off saw. If you don't have one of those, you can cut it with a hacksaw by hand. It just takes a bit longer. And an angle grinder with a flat disc to neaten up your welds and stuff. Yes, do not judge me, there is no guard on this one, but I don't use this for cutting. I just use it for cleaning up a little bit. So, I also use a welding machine. I prefer to TIG weld everything. I'll show you in a sec. You can use any welding machine for this, as long as you can weld. There's plenty of tutorials online and on the University of YouTube to learn how to weld with any type. For those of you that don't know what a TIG welder is, it's basically a teeny little tungsten electrode that comes out of a cup. There's argon gas that flows outside, that flows over your tungsten electrode, so when you've got an arc, the tungsten doesn't get consumed. You basically have an arc that liquefies the metal piece that you're welding, and the argon gas, it's called a shielding gas, that flows over it prevents the steel from burning or oxidizing. This is the machine that I use. It's not a fancy ass machine. This one does a lot of everything. You can use general stick welding, you can do TIG welding, you just can't do MIG. This is an AC-DC machine, so you can set it between AC and DC, so you can weld different metals with it, including aluminium. Yes, I said aluminium. And you basically need your shielding gas, which in this case I have a tank of argon. And that's about it in a nutshell. And in case you need, just keep a spare disc for cutting off, for your steel cutoff. Okay, so basically what I'm looking at doing is creating a shelf, well, a steel frame that's got a miter joint here and a miter joint there. I want this one to be 800 millimeters. I want this to be 400. I do want there to be a secondary piece over here and a support. Because this is also going to act like a sort of a bookshelf as well, this inside section, I want it to be 300 millimeters. So a piece of plywood can sit over there as the actual shelf, and it can sit over there as an actual shelf. So what we're going to do is make these miter cuts first, and then the rest are all 90-degree cuts. So I'm basically going to cut just a little bit more than 400 off some sheets and some 800 pieces, and then I'll cut the 90-degree cuts, and that should do it. On the very end there, if we take a little section like that, you're going to see the frame, and I'm basically going to weld a piece of, well, it's going to run across the entire back, piece of flat bar, and drill two little holes which I'll anchor to the wall. So if you look on the top, you're basically going to see that, not to scale, and your hole goes through there, and that's where your stuff goes through into the wall. And then your shelf obviously goes there with its whatever, with its actual shelfy bits. In between the two, as an intermediary support, when the shelf is actually mounted, I want the shelf frame spacing to be 1 meter apart. In order for your timber not to sag, on this section here, I'm going to put in a 50 by 25 millimeter piece and a 50 by 25 millimeter piece there to support the timber. So, sorry, I left that off my ingredients list, but basically it's double the width of that. I have some on the floor over there. It's a little bit rusted, but that piece over there is a 25 by 50, and I'm going to use that. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to use some of my older steel first, which is a little bit dirty, and not use my new steel. Because this is hot rolled steel, all the steel has a little bit of a seam. The steel has a bit of a seam there, so I'd like to kind of put that on the inside. So you rather have the nice faces and not the seam, which means I want the miter cuts to be on the side perpendicular to the seam. So I'm going to do all my cuts on this side at an angle. So now we just got to set up the saw and start cutting. Okay, so now that the saw is set, we can start marking our steel, just remembering where the seam line is. So I'm going to cut one, and that is going to be the reference for everything. So I want this to be 400 millimeters, and because this is going to be the top, for instance, we're going to want the miter cut to be this way, so we can cut it down, in which case we have to do it the other way around. So we cut on this side, since the blade is facing this way, we're going to want the miter cut there. So let's mark our 400 millimeter. I'm using a wax marker, just trying to mark anything onto steel. Well, if you're trying to mark with a pencil, it's pretty crap, like that. So let us just take our mark. And that's where we're cutting. Now, sometimes your blade can be a little bit worn when you're doing a miter cut and you plunge your blade all the way down. It doesn't quite make it through your entire piece that you're cutting. Sometimes you just want to put an extra little something in there just to move your piece that you're cutting a little bit further away, because remember, this blade is generally cutting perpendicular, but now you've moved the cut point further along this line. So as the arc of the blade comes through, sometimes the arc doesn't go all the way through. So it's nice to just get your piece in there, get it all lined up. Now always factor in the blade thickness. There's always a thickness to the blade. So once your blade is there, you just lock everything into place. Now also keep in mind when you start tightening these things, because it's not a precise precision machine, when you tighten this, it has a tendency to push your workpiece a little bit further on. So if I tighten this, for instance, also make sure that the other end of your piece is supported, especially if it's a long piece, with something of equal height as that. So once you've tightened this down, in this case I don't see it moving, but I know that sometimes it does, that'll do. That's perfectly on there. So let's start cutting. Okay, now that we've made our cut, you'll see that we have a burr because we're using an abrasive blade. It always has something like that, and that's where the angle grinder comes in. You're just going to clean that, just going to clean that off a little bit. And then, you're just going to grind a little bit. Since you're going to be welding in there, you might as well just try and clean it a little bit. Okay, so now that we have our first piece cut, we already have our 90-degree edge. We're going to take care of all our other miter cuts first. In this case, we're going to take care of our 800 millimeter miter cut, which is, if you remember on your drawing, it's the long piece. And we're going to clean this edge up as well while we're at it. I don't like to work with gloves, you lose all sensitivity. That's what she said. Okay. In this particular case, we can see our miter is actually going the wrong way because we're going to have the seam on the outside. So we're going to reverse this and we're going to put a miter cut that side, and then we're going to cut our 800 millimeters. Okay, now that we've done that, we've got our seam on the inside again. Now we're going to do our miter cut on the other side, which is 800 millimeters away. So we're going to take our marker again. We're going to measure, because we're measuring 800 from the front and not the back. So we're just going to put a little mark on the corner, since it's going to be a miter cut, so you know what to reference off. And because this is a shelf and not an exact science, I'm simply going to, so it might be off by 1 or 2 millimeters, as long as all the pieces are exactly the same size. And I'll show you what I'll do with that now. So let us cut this one. Okay, so now we have a nice miter cut, which will make a very nice miter joint later on. Okay, so now we have our reference size here. Now we need to cut another one like that, and we need to cut another one like this. So once again, the seam moved to the outside over here, which we don't particularly want. Gonna cut off another piece. So we're going to do one more 800mm miter cut. Now, in order to make sure that they're both exactly the same, we're actually going to use the existing piece. We're going to line it up perfectly. Actually, sorry, wrong side. We're going to put it on this side and line it up perfectly so that when we press it, the blade edge needs to just touch your workpiece. So I'm just going to go here, make sure the ends are lined up. I want the blade to just be brushing. You can hear it? It's just brushing past the existing steel. I'm just going to leave that there. Tighten this down. Not too tight. And then of course, just for accuracy's sake, I'm going to hold that there. Make sure the other end is perfect. Yes, that's perfect. We can now remove this. Now, when doing miter cuts, because you're cutting at an angle and you're not cutting perpendicular to the blade, these blades have a tendency to flex. So don't rush your miter cuts, take your time. This particular one I'm not going to speed up, so you can watch how long it actually takes to do a miter cut. Okay, and that's how long it took to do a miter cut. Now you have two lengths perfectly, you have two pieces perfectly aligned lengthwise on both sides. Now we're just gonna clean up this as well. And I'm just gonna use a Scotch-Brite pad later on just to clean this little bit of surface rust off. So these are the two fronts of our shaft. So now we're going to get back to doing our edges. We have 3 more of these to make. There we have another piece that's pretty much spot on. Okay, so that's all our pieces finished. I believe we have 4 of these. Now we just need to cut these off we need to cut this one off at 90 degrees. So we'll reset our saw to perpendicular cut. We just need to trim this one off at 90 degrees. So in this case, we're going to line up these two sides. We're going to measure the blade that side. So it's nice to just have everything sort of snug, but enough so that you can move it without too much play. Okay, so now that we have our main frame pieces, all chopped up. Wait, what have I done? Wrong one. Our frame pieces, all chopped up. We're going to just chuck these up on the table. Now we're going to cut off our little in-between pieces. Since the shelf support pieces are going to be 300 millimeters apart, we're only going to need to cut. Let's just go back to this thing. Don't know if you guys can see it, but we only need to make 2 of these. So we need to cut 2 of these at 300 millimeters. Because this is 800 millimeters and each of these pieces are 25, we've got 800 to the outermost points, which means we've got a 750 piece over there. So we need 2 pieces that are 750 millimeters and 2 pieces, sorry, not 1 piece, 2 pieces that are 300 millimeters. So let's cut that. Okay, so now that we've got all our pieces, we've got our supports near the wall, we've got our front pieces, and we've got our 4 top and bottom pieces. We have our intermediate pieces. We'll cut the supports later. Since I want it to be 1 meter wide, I'll take it so that the actual shelf space between the frames is 1 meter wide, so I'll simply cut 1 meter over 25 by 50, which is basically double the size of this, but it is exactly that. So when they join in, it won't affect anything. So we'll do that one a little bit later, so let's just make the frames. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our 2 pieces from the sides, the top and bottom. Remember, seam is on the inside and the joint is on the inside. Same thing with this. We're going to use our little handy dandy little clamps and just slip them in there like that. And we're going to put these in here like this. There's always so much stuff everywhere. Okay, so we're going to take our clamps. We're going to make sure, because the clamps aren't exactly flush with the thing, with the table, we have to line them up perfectly. So you've got to make sure that everything meets up perfectly. I will line this up now, and I'll give you a little close-up. So we're going to do this one. And then just as a precaution, you can feel it is flush, but just give it a little bit of a hit there, just to make sure everything is lined up. Same thing goes for this side. We're gonna line everything up nicely. I believe I'm using the wrong piece here. This is not right. 1, 2. Sorry, this is an offcut. This is the right piece. Okay, sorry. Let's do that again. So everything fits in here, and obviously we put our little caps on the end there, which I'll show you just now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do teeny little tack welds. So I do a little tack on the end and a little tack on the inside. And I'll show you that now. In fact, let's get a close-up of all these things here quickly. So that's basically it. This little clamp lines everything and holds everything really tightly. Same thing here. This one was slightly skew, not the best miter cut on earth, but that's basically it. These clamps are awesome. So another thing, guys, when you're welding, try and protect your arms, try and protect your skin, because the UV light that comes out of a welding arc gives you sunburn. So depending on the type of welding you do, your gloves are going to differ as well. Because I do TIG welding, the heat is super concentrated into one little area, so your workpiece doesn't get that hot unless you're doing a monster weld. I generally use longer gloves because I always tend to sunburn myself if I use the short gloves because of the jacket that I'm using. Also make sure your neck is covered up, and actually I've always got the problem, I'm gonna put a little piece of leather that just hangs off my mask. This is the auto darkening helmet, which has seen better days. So you can just wear it, you can see through it, and then it automatically darkens as you're welding. It was something pretty cheap, you guys can pick these up for a reasonable price. So let's get the welding machine on, and then purge your line. If you're TIG welding and you haven't used your machine in a while, just make sure you get some argon gas flowing through your line if there's any air in there. So just touch your pedal. You've got a post-flow setting, so I think mine's only on 2 seconds. What is it? Post-flow. My post-flow is 4 seconds and my pre-flow is 0.2 seconds. Okay, so now that we've purged our line, otherwise we get a lot of splutter, I'm just going to get a piece of welding filler wire. So because these welds are because these welds are super small, I'm just using a 2.5mm filler wire. And our earth is important. Of course, we just need to earth whatever it is that we're welding. And let's get to it. Okay, so let's get a close-up. I'll show you the tacks. Okay, so these are just 2 itty-bitty little tacks there and there, and there and there. The reason for tacking everything into place before you do your full seam is because if I were to run a full seam across that, welded from the inside to the outside, what will end up happening is the minute I loosen these clamps, the bottom is going to come apart. And the reason for that is because even though heat expands when it's hot, it also cools and contracts. So there's nothing holding it on the other side. It's going to deform everything. So you want the tacks to hold everything in place, because it's much more difficult to try and deform something that's been tacked in place. But it gives you enough flexibility that if you need to bend and force a little something into place, it can do that. So that is the reason for tacking everything before doing a full weld. So I'm just going to finish tacking all the pieces in place, and then I'll do the same on the other, and then I'll do a full weld all around. Sometimes, if you're TIG welding and you bump yourself like an idiot, your little molten blob of steel touches your tungsten and then ruins it. So you have to take it out and give it a little sharpen. with these. They are messy, like I said. I'll show you one of the welds. They are messy. So that is a TIG weld on dirty steel. It is pretty shitty. So is that one, except that one I didn't know what I was doing there. That one's also alright-ish. That one's alright. Actually, you know what? I'm not proud of any of these welds. But you know what? This is a quick build. I'm not doing a work of art. I'm not doing a pressure vessel. I'm not following proper TIG welding technique. I'm just wanting to get this done really quickly. So now that this frame is done, I'm going to very quickly weld up the corners. Perfect. So we are going to clean everything up with a grinder now, because we don't want to see any welds. We want everything to be flush. Okay, so now that this is done, this is what we have. This is going to get its ends plates. We've made one of these. That's pretty much it. So I'm now going to switch the extractor fan on because it's getting a little smoky in here, and I'm going to build the other one. In the meantime, enjoy the song that's playing. The name of the song should be there, and if you like it, go to the video. It should be on YouTube. Okay, chat to you just now. Okay, right, so now we have two of these, which are pretty much almost spot on. Somehow missed it by 0.5 millimeter. So I'm just going to grind these down a teeny bit, just so that they match exactly. So now we just need to cut a little piece of flat bar. So I'm going to cut a piece. They're basically going this way because it's easier to get the drill in and you don't really see them anyway. So I'm going to cut a piece 3 times the size of this. So it's going to be 75 millimeter lengths of flat bar, and then I'm going to drill 2 holes into each. So that will be essentially our mounting bracket, which I'm going to weld onto this, and that will be it. Okay, so I've measured 75 millimeters. Actually, I made it 80, just to give it the benefit of the doubt. Now, of course, we're just gonna neaten them up a little. Okay, so now we have our 4 little pieces. We're gonna drill holes in them. Okay. So we're drilling 8 millimeter holes in there, so this drill bit will not be doing the trick. We will be using this instead. Okay, so this is one area where I would advise you use gloves. I use anti-cut gloves in this particular case. If you are using a drill press, if you are using the vise, then it's fine, but I'm just gonna like freehand the thing there. The reason I say use anti-cut gloves is if that drill bites, it's gonna wanna take this thing out of your hand. So best be careful in that regard. We all learn from our mistakes at some point in time and get pretty close to getting injured. So, also use some pretty decent, that one's finished. Use some decent cutting oil. When you're cutting, it saves your drill bits and makes your cuts a hell of a lot easier. Also remember that if you're drilling through steel, drill at a low speed. Okay, sorry about that, my phone died. Anyway, so these are these little things. We just need to clean off the little burrs here quickly with a grinder. Now that these are done, we're just gonna weld them on. So let's get on to that one. Okay, so we're just gonna do one of these at a time. Just gonna use one piece to keep it all like upright, level and stuff. And then I'm literally just gonna eyeball this in the center, like that, and weld it on. These welds are nice and neat, there's no need for anything else. Now we're going to do the cross pieces. Now we're going to cut two pieces of this, 1 meter long each, and that will be our cross support. And that will tie our shelves together. Pieces, clean up the edges just very quickly. Okay, so that is our two pieces. Now comes the trickiest part of the lot. It's just balancing everything that you can put them all together. Soul and chains of iron, hearts of gold. Okay. There we have everything lined up. Now we're going to tack it there, turn the whole thing over and do a proper seam. We'll just make sure that everything is aligned properly and it's not sitting this way or that way. Need to just come a little bit this way. And we are pretty much straight. There we go. We're good. We're now perfectly straight. Here is the basic framework for the shelf, which you can't really see amongst all the crap. So I basically need to clean all this off, all this surface rust. So I'm just going to use Scotch-Brite pads like this. I sometimes do use a Scotch-Brite Sorry, I just dropped you guys. Sometimes do use a Scotch-Brite pad on the grinder. It's also a little flat disc, I don't think. Oh yeah, something like this. This kind of works quite well, but it does clog up pretty quickly. But it's really good to get the rust off. Sometimes I use a cup, sometimes I use wire brush, depends. Okay, so all that's left is now to take a Scotch-Brite cloth, clean all this rust off, take a little benzene or thinners, wipe it down and give it a coat of paint. On second thought, I'm going to use that Scotch-Brite. Sorry, my phone just cut off there. What I'm going to use there is Rust-Oleum Flat Black with primer. I made a set of shelves like these about 4 years ago as like a quick build. I needed shelves and I was expecting to rebuild them given the humidity in summer around here, and they are perfect. Like not a spot of rust, not a bit of anything. So I'm not going to prime them. I'm just going to use some of this. It's supposed to have the primer with it. Just get it in all the crevices, give it 2 coats, maybe 3, depending, and you'll be good to go. Call it a night. I need to wait for this to dry before I flip it over, paint the other side, and then tomorrow we'll be back just to do the actual shelf bit. But first we're going to install this in the room, and then I'll make sure that the shelf's size is correct because I want a gap to put a pot plant. So see you tomorrow. Okay, bye. Okay, welcome to the next day. The paint is dry. I brought the frame in here now. So I've measured the height of that and I've just marked it on the wall where the top bolt is on that, considering these are exactly this is exactly the same dimensions as that shelf, except that one's just longer. So what I'm going to do now is drill the very first hole up there, and but first I just want to position it to see if I'm actually happy with the positioning. I'm good with that. That means that mark can stay. So what I'm gonna do to make this a little bit easier is I'm gonna drill the first hole there, and I'm just gonna loosely place an anchor bolt inside it just to hold it in place, then use a level to level it. So keep in mind, you guys can drill this with pretty much anything. If you've got a little rotary hammer drill, you can drill it with that just by a little masonry drill bit and it should be fine. Otherwise, if you want to invest in a decent machine, I can suggest a nice SDS machine like this. It just makes things so much easier when drilling into hard stuff. This house is very old and it was abandoned for a very long time. So it's got really old bricks that are really, really, really hard. Of course, if you guys are in the States and you predominantly have some sort of drywalling, you'd obviously use the adequate drywall fixings. However, I would recommend doing a slightly different bracket on this if you're doing it up on drywall. Probably something that spreads the weight on 3 points as opposed to 2. And it also depends what you're going to hang on it. Like, I'm putting a ton of books here because of my job, a lot of reference stuff, a lot of papers, so this shelf is gonna carry quite a weight. So to drill in this room without making a mess, I just using a vacuum cleaner that's basically gonna be held against where I'm drilling, and it should suck up everything. So let's get to it. It's a little bit difficult to push properly with just one hand. Let me get the anchor bolts quick. So I'm just using these. These are 8mm by 75mm anchor bolts. I have got them on that shelf and my shelf in the other office with a ton of stuff on it, so they definitely work. Get up here, put this thing in. So this is the innermost one. Like that. Okay. So all I'm gonna do is just line it up with these shelves and it should be good to go. It should in theory be level all the way. So let's lift this up and put it there. And that's pretty much spot on. Okay, so 2 bolts are holding it. I'm going to drill the rest of the holes through the steel because I'm using 8mm bolts with an 8mm bit through an 8mm hole, so everything should be good. By doing it this way, that's also the reason why I made the flanges a little bit longer so you can fit the drilling machine through there. The other reason for doing it is there's less chance of you missing the hole, because when you're drilling into masonry or really hard stuff like this, a drill bit tends to drift, and if it drifts then your holes don't line up and you can't get your bolts in. So I'm gonna fetch a hammer, which I have here, and I'm gonna knock these bolts in and then drill the balance of the holes. And that's it. Now you've got a shelf strong enough to literally hang off. Oops. So yeah. So that's that. Now we can get all this crap out of here and we can go cut some shelves. Okay, so here we have a little piece of off-cut plywood. Actually the other half of the sheet was used for the shelves that are currently there. So again, minimal tools, don't need to use a table saw, just get a handheld circular saw. Well, we're ripping today, we're going, I suppose it doesn't really matter, we're going with the grain today. So all you need to do is to set up a guide if you don't have one of those fancy track saws. Just get a piece of aluminium profile. Yes, we pronounce it aluminium here in South Africa. That is also how we spell it, same as the UK and everywhere else. So the thing that you just need to take into account is the offset from the edge of your ski to your blade. So what I've done, except I can't find it because everything's a mess, is I generally mark on a little steel ruler the offset from the outside to the start of the blade and the end of the blade, because the blade has a thickness to it. So that way I know that if I want my cut to end in a particular way, I line it up with the start portion of the blade or the end portion, whichever I want. So yeah, just take your blade offset into account and then let's do some measuring. So considering the gap between the shelves is 300 millimeters, I'm gonna allow for a little bit of movement. So I'm gonna give a tolerance of 5 millimeters. It's more than enough, but I just prefer a little bit of leniency. But because it's a shelf, it actually plays no critical role. It's not going to wobble, it's not going to anything. So I'm gonna measure out 295, a point on this side and a point on this side. Okay, and it's not really necessary to draw a line, but I like to draw a line for reference purposes. So, just to stop the thing from moving, grab some clamps and just clamp it down. So, remember, if you're clamping on the one side, theoretically it's fine, but it can still shift if you end up moving it. If you end up moving it too much. Okay, so now that that's done, let's just make sure the line has moved. No, it hasn't. So there's our line. Now we just need to shift this over to accommodate for the ski of the blade, the ski of the saw. So there where we marked. Alright, and that's done. So now, just to verify, I'm going to make sure, just open this up, and make sure our blade is actually going to cut exactly where we want, and it is. Another thing to do, which is just good practice, is to make sure what's underneath, so you don't end up cutting through your table that you've got this thing on. That should do it. Also, I'm just going to add this little piece of railway line to stop the thing from tipping over a little bit. So now that we're ready to cut, just going to switch the extractor on. Okay. So usually I would have something on this side to just hold it, but it's alright. I'll take care of it. And that's our piece. So now we will just get rid of the other one. Okay, so a piece of plywood sheet, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but it's 2.440 long and 1.220 wide. Reason for the extras is so you can trim off the factory edges, because factory edges are not straight. Everyone should know that. Okay, so being 2.4, half of this will naturally be 1.2. I am going to trim that little edge off, but yeah, I think we can pretty much cut this exactly in half. Just going to knock that little edge right off, and it's going to become 2.43. So half of 243 is 1212. Sorry, 2430 is 12125. If you have just a plain angle, it's pretty easy to just get a 90-degree. Oops, I used the baby one. That way you know exactly where to cut. So you can either do what I've just done, or you can use a compound miter saw like this one. If you can, get one. If you're planning on doing woodwork, it's definitely one of the best investments that I've made. I've used it so much. It's been great. A really nice tool to have, especially if you're doing a lot of cuts on a lot of small things, cutting angles, cutting all kinds of stuff, miters and whatnot. So some of these come with a little laser, some of these come with all kinds of stuff here. Either way, it's very handy. Some of them you can pull out these little legs, have a larger piece if you want to work on it like that. For this one, the blade's going straight through the middle, and then you just want to make sure you've loosened your thing so you can actually cut. And that's it. That's our shelves done. Now we're just going to give it a little bit of a sanding. So the shelves that I currently have up there have little lights underneath them. I basically used this little aluminium profile that I bolted to the bottom of the shelf, and I ran a little LED strip on the inside, on the bottom, and I spray painted it black. I'm not going to do that today because it's almost Christmas time and the supplier for the lights has closed, so I don't think I'll be able to get that particular LED strip this week, so I might do that next year. But the purpose of this is really just to make the shelves. Whatever you want to do with it, light-wise, you guys do whatever you want. Okay, so I am going to use a sanding machine. You can always sand by hand. In this case, I think I'm using what looks like a 120. Yes, it is a 120 grit sandpaper. Now for a little bit of hand sanding, I'm just going to use a little bit of 180 just to take the edges off a little. Here I'm using a Imbuya wood sealer made by our local guys, Grip Seal, and we're just going to rub it in there and let it cure for a bit. So this is probably the only time you'll find me wearing gloves, is when there's a risk of literally staining myself permanently. And that's it, we're good to go. Now we're just going to let this dry a bit, and then we'll go and install it. Okay, so welcome back. Let's put the shelves on. So basically, considering this is literally the worst quality you can get, just a matter of deciding which one I want to see from the bottom. I actually don't think it matters much, but just stick it in there and and drop it in place. And same thing here. I think that's a nice side for the bottom, and of course the nice side in front. And that'll do it. So yeah, a super simple shelf, exactly like that one, except this one has the little LED strips, which you can see are directly under there, like that. And yeah, it's the same thing here. And it's just got that teeny little matte black piece over there just to stop the glare. That's what I'm gonna do here as soon as the supplier is open. Okay, well I guess there we have some reference. But that's not gonna go there. So I do plan on doing a full height shelf through the whole back here. That's got lots and lots of little shelves, not quite this spacing. Well, some with the spacing, some with half spacing for small things like this. So that's gonna be a future build. And yeah, that's where we're gonna leave it for today. So thanks for watching. Sorry the video was a little bit long. I just thought it was essential that you guys saw every little bit, especially if you're a beginner. Otherwise, yeah, be good to one another. See you in the next video. Okay, bye.